In this video, which is part of Doctrine installation, we will discuss how do you install Doctrine. First of all, we typically install Doctrine from the command prompt. You need to change to the root directory of your project. This is the directory under which all of your source code will reside. You will then need to install Composer. The specifics of the Composer installation are discussed in detail in other videos. You would then create a composer.json file, which will have a requirement for Doctrine. Finally, you would run php composer.var install. This will then scan the contents of the composer.json file and make sure that all project requirements are met. The composer.json file that we will use will look something like this. The name is optional and simply describes the project. Likewise, the description gives information pertinent to the project. The time will tell us when the project was commenced. Author information tells us who derived the project and an email address for contact information. The most important aspect, however, is the required directive. In this case, we need to indicate Doctrine/ORM. ORM stands for Object Relational Mapping and is a key component in the Doctrine project. There are subsidiary Doctrine libraries which will then be drawn in as requirements of Doctrine/ORM. One of the things that Composer will do is to find all of the dependencies for Doctrine ORM and bring those in before it actually brings in the Doctrine ORM libraries themselves. The star simply tells us to use the most recent version. So first of all, we move to the root directory for our project, in this case /var/www/doctrine. As you can see, I have source code, a public folder which contains JavaScript, CSS, images, and other public assets. The public folder will eventually be mapped to the web server document root for the project. The directory called src contains the source code for the project. You can also see a composer.json file, which we will use a little bit later on. However, as you can see, we are missing Composer itself, which is contained in an archive file referred to as composer.var. The command to install Composer is based upon the PHP read file function. We read from the getcomposer.org website and look for the installer. The -d directive allows us to override the PHP ini setting allow URL fopen to make sure that this is allowed. Finally, the output is piped back through PHP itself. The first thing that happens, of course, is the composer.var file is downloaded. We will then see a message indicating success. We also have a hint as to how to use Composer. You can now see that we have a file called composer.var. We will then use this in conjunction with the composer.json file to install Doctrine. As mentioned before, a key component to the composer.json file is the required directive. Under the required directive, we tell Composer to install the Doctrine/ORM library. This will then draw in all of the other needed Doctrine subcomponents. By typing the command php composer.var install, and by requiring Doctrine/ORM, we are installing Doctrine. You'll notice that all of the subcomponents came in at the same time, including Doctrine Common, Doctrine DBAL, which stands for Database Abstraction Layer, and a number of other related and useful components. Notice the suggestions at the bottom of the screen, which are derived from the various composer.json files within the Doctrine libraries themselves. As the name implies, suggestions are just that. They are useful but not absolutely necessary for the running of your project. One last thing you'll notice is generating autoload files. Composer itself generates an autoloader. The autoloading capability allows you to reference classes even if you've not indicated include or require within your code. You'll notice that an extra folder has been created called Vendor. If you look under the vendor folder, you can see that this is where the Doctrine libraries reside. And as mentioned before, the most important libraries include ORM, DBAL, and Common.